Good morning, everyone. We are the Emerson College Skin Tones. We are Emerson's first and only a cappella group comprised of only students of color, and we perform songs by only singers of color. So we're really looking forward to this, and we're really grateful for this opportunity. So our first song is Miss Independent by Neo, and our soloist is Rebecca Brunson.
Yes,
Something about the way she moves. I can't figure it out, it's something about her. Say, ooh, it's something about kind of woman that wants you but don't need you. I can't figure it out, it's something about her. Cause she walk like a boss, talk like a boss, manicure and nails, just the pedicure on. She's fly effortlessly, yeah. And she move like a boss, do what a boss do. She got me thinking about getting involved. That's the kind of girl I need. She got her own thing, that's why I love her. Miss Independent, won't you come and spend a little time? She got her own thing, that's why I love her. Miss Independent, ooh, the way she shines. Miss Independent, hey. Oh, oh, okay, yes, oh, hey. Y'all can clap, y'all can clap. Ooh, it's something about kind of woman that can do for herself. There you go, I look at her and it makes me proud. Something about her, something so sexy about kind of woman that don't even need my help. She says she got it, no doubt. It's something about her, okay. Cause she work like a boss, play like a boss. Car in the crib, she bout to pay them both off. And bills are paid on time, yeah. And she made for a boss, only a boss. Anything less, she tell me gonna get lost. That's the girl that's on my mind. She got her own thing, that's why I love her. Miss Independent, won't you come and spend a little time? She got her own thing, that's why I love her. Miss Independent, ooh, the way she shines. Miss Independent, her favorite thing to say, don't worry, I got it. And everything she got, best believe she bought it. She don't steal my heart, ain't no doubt about it. Girl, you're everything I need. Said you're everything I need. Oh, okay. Hey, y'all can clap, Oh, hey, that's why I love her. Miss Independent, she got her own thing. That's why I love her. Miss Independent, ooh, the way she shines. Miss Independent, her own thing. That's why I love her.
All right, our next song is Stay by Rihanna, so yeah, good.
Do old sweat, hot-headed believer. I threw my hands in the air, said, show me something. He said, if you dare, come a little closer. Round and around and around and around we go. Oh, now tell me now, tell me now, tell me now, you know. Not really sure how to feel about it. Something in the way she moves makes me feel like I can't live without you. It takes me all the way. I want you to stay. It's not much of a life you're living. It's not just something you take, it's given. Round and around and around and around we go. Oh, now tell me now, tell me now, tell me now, you know. Not really sure how to feel about it. Something in the way you move makes me feel like I can't live without you. It takes me all the way. I want you to stay. Ooh, the reason I hold on. Ooh, 'cause I need this whole gun. Funny, you're the broken one, but I'm the only one who needed saving. 'Cause when you never see the light, it's hard to know which one of us is caving. Not really sure how to feel about it. Something in the way you move makes me feel like I can't live without you. It takes me all the way. I want you to stay. Stay. I want you to stay.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Let's give it up again for the Skin Tones. It's really a pleasure to see so many people gathered here today for Emerson's third annual Teach-In on Race. The Teach-In is sponsored by the President's Office, by Academic Affairs and the Social Justice Center, and many others across campus help plan and coordinate this day-long series of events. And I especially want to thank Jabari Asim, who's hiding over there. You're the best, man. You really are. Michelle Whalen is here somewhere. Carol Parker, Matt Finn. Stand up. Where are you? There's Matt. There's Carol. And Michelle, stand up. So, I want to thank all of them for their dedication to the teach-in. You know, we began the teach-in on race to enhance our community's understanding of race, particularly in the U.S., both historically and currently, to build capacity on campus for communicating about matters of race, ethnicity, and identity, to enhance a campus culture that supports students and faculty and staff of color, and to help the Emerson community to engage around issues of race and racism and generate actions that address race relations on this campus, of course, and even beyond. We look forward to a meaningful and thoughtful and productive teach-in, and at the same time, we recognize that our commitment to diversity and inclusion goes beyond whatever happens today. We are a community driven by the diversity of ideas and people, acting together in shared interests and in the enduring power of our common humanity. We know that the different points of view that emerges from diverse cultural heritages and ethnic backgrounds enlarge our aesthetic horizons, enrich our intellectual discourse, sharpen our historical perspective, and give increased focus to who we are and what we stand for as a nation. In an academic community like ours, without diversity, there is no excellence. And as our society becomes ever more interconnected and global, the ability to appreciate, to respect, to learn from, and seek out different aspects become increasingly important. We know that diversity leads to inclusion when people are able to bring their full selves to study, to learn, to create, to innovate, and to work with one another at the highest levels of performances. And this value is reinforced, of course, in our Center for Social Justice under the leadership of Vice President Sylvia Spears. At Emerson, inclusive excellence is at the core, it's at the center, it's at the heart of who we are and the work that we do every day. And I hope that today's events will inspire you, will broaden your perspective, and allow you the opportunity, and this is most important, to learn and to grow along with your peers and your faculty within a community that is deeply committed to inclusive excellence. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Adam Spry, who teaches Native American and Global Indigenous and American Literatures in Emerson's Writing, Literature, and Publishing Department. His research examines the intersection of Native cultural production and U.S. federal Indian policy over the past 2 centuries. And his monograph, Our War Paint is Writers, Inc., is a comparative literary history and writing by and about the Ananishi Agbeg, I got that right, people since the 19th century. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Adam. Adam.
Ani bonjour. Minogishgad. Adam Spry Nadijikaz, Gawaba Bagani Kagin Donjaba, Kiksadi Ndodem. My name's Adam Spry. I come from the White Earth Anishinaabe Nation, and my family are the Kiksadi of the Sun House at Wrangell in Alaska. I'm here today to introduce our keynote speaker, but before I do, I want to very briefly acknowledge the people whose land we are now upon, the Nipmuc, the Wampanoag, and the Massachusetts people, who have for the past 500 years remained on this land in the face of colonization, racism, and dispossession, and who we should thank for continuing to protect and look after this land. So, welcome, to repeat what President Pelton said, welcome to the 3rd annual Teach-In on Race. It is my distinct pleasure today to introduce writer, scholar, and educator Rachel Kuo. Rachel joins us today from New York City, where she researches digital technologies and racial justice movements. She has worked as a social justice educator, designing curriculum and communication strategy for the NYU Center for Multicultural Education and Programs and the University of Wisconsin Multicultural Student Center. Rachel is a founding member and current affiliate of the Center for Critical Race and Digital Studies and is also on the leadership committee for the Asian American Feminist Collective. Her writing on cultural politics, food, beauty, and technology has been published in Everyday Feminism, where she is a contributing writer, also in the Huffington Post, Open Democracy, Reappropriate, New Media, and Society, Journal of Communications, and the Routledge Companion to Asian American Media. Her preferred pronouns are she, hers. Just a note on format, this is going to be a little bit different than how the keynote has happened in the past. Rachel is going to give some preliminary remarks, and then she will be joined on stage by a group of Emerson students who are leaders on campus. She will be joined today by Isel Solano Sanchez, Director of Flawless Brown, whose preferred pronouns are she, hers. Christopher Henderson West, President of EAGLE, Emerson's advancement group for love and expression, and his preferred pronouns are he, his. Leah Kim, Interim President of Asia, Asian Students for Intercultural Awareness, and her preferred pronouns are she, hers. And Sarah Prezada, President of DESI, Emerson's South Asian Student Association, whose preferred pronouns are she, hers. Without further ado, please help me in giving a warm welcome to Rachel Kuo.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here today and also coming in on such a rainy Friday morning. Thank you to everyone who put this event together, Jabari, Matthew, Carol, and everyone else behind the scenes, and also their student organizers who fought to make this teach-in a reality. I'd also like to recognize the everyday labor of faculty, students, and staff of color in transforming institutional spaces. Thank you, Adam, as well, for the land acknowledgement and welcoming us to this site on which we gather. To organize for racial justice means to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and colonial settlement that bring us here today. My brief talk will focus on the political work of education and racial justice movements from the perspectives of campus dissent, knowledge production in higher education, and the uses of pedagogy to practice accountability. Historically, many radical movements have grown from college campuses and have been led by students of color. There is enormous organizing power of students to build coalition and make change. Before coming here, I was reading more about the protests here, specifically at Emerson, and really struck by this quote in the Boston Globe from student leader Julio Villegas in 2017. 2 years may seem like nothing, but you have to understand through the lens of a student, 2.5 years is more than half our time here. This quote reminded me a lot of my own experiences as a student organizer when I was at the University of Missouri 10 years ago. You may all remember the University of Missouri when Jonathan Butler in 2015 started the hunger strike, and also the football team boycott and all the subsequent protests at campuses across the nation. And so I've been thinking a lot about the legacies of student struggle and organizing and how that gets taken up year after year. The uses of bureaucracy to slow change is a tactic to maintain institutional power, and this often happens at the expense of students who aren't getting enough sleep, who on top of studying and classes and working, often to afford the steep costs of higher education, are also organizing against racism in institutions and putting in so much time and energy to generate spaces where they feel wholly supported and seen, as well as create lasting changes that last beyond their tenure. When I was at Mizzou, we organized through Forefront, a council of student-run organizations for historically marginalized and minoritized groups, including the Legion of Black Collegians, Triangle Coalition, Muslim Student Organization, Asian American Association, and others. At the time, given severe lack of funding and understaffing, the labor of diversity work fell primarily to student orgs to develop programming. Beyond fighting for the reallocation of student fees, one of the initiatives we worked on then was demanding mandatory curriculum towards social justice education, or also, like curriculum for racial awareness and inclusion. To put things in historical perspective, the Legion of Black Collegiates at Missouri had been demanding a diversity requirement at the university since 1969. These demands have always been about redressing historical racial inequalities. Demands for curriculum changes are less about so-called diverse learning requirements and outcomes that extract knowledge and experiences from students of color, but rather redressing the structures and power embedded in systems of knowledge production that center and privilege whiteness. What is so key about the student demands here and also from students around the country is the attention paid to addressing racism at a foundational level. Because race and racism are embedded in the structural foundations of this nation and also in global hierarchies, we also need to make racial justice as well as diversity and inclusion a structural part of how we produce and share knowledge and also organize the institution. So diversity shouldn't be seen as this add-on. I deeply believe in the power of student organizing, but also believe that the labor of igniting and sustaining campus change shouldn't only fall to the students and people most directly impacted by structural racism. Marginalized people should not bear the burden of doing diversity or being diversity. While change definitely needs to happen at the large institutional scale, institutions are also made up of people. The focus on individual action does make structural racism less visible. However, we can also think about the cumulative effects of actions that normalize structures of racism as an everyday part of campus culture. Often moments of noticeable racism at universities get treated as if they're a blip or a glitch in an otherwise smoothly functioning system. The racist fraternity chants, explicit remarks by an individual professor. Yet racial ideologies that prioritize whiteness get reproduced through curriculum, campus traditions, admissions policies, and hiring and decision-making practices of faculty and staff. And the burden often falls to those negatively impacted by these policies to point out the problem, to interrupt and disrupt. We must be able to incorporate racial justice into everyday action and practice. What kind of work are we all willing to do in a way that disrupts everyday comfort? How can we be willing to do what feminist scholar Sarah Ahmed describes as feminist killjoys, those that expose the fractures, the costs, and the erasures? How can we collectively refuse to be incorporated into racial projects that reproduce exclusion and instead demand efforts that pursue equity and justice? Often so much energy goes into convincing people that racism exists and that race continues to matter. We know it does, so what are we going to do about it? What are the real commitments to diversity and anti-racism beyond aesthetic measures? The majority of my adult life has been spent on college campuses working with students, first by working at multicultural student centers and now also in the classroom. One of the reasons I chose to pursue a doctorate degree stemmed from my own experiences as an undergraduate and graduate student, and also the stories of the students I worked with. I remember my core graduate syllabi at both the master's and doctorate level had no work by people of color, no queer theory, and less than a handful of scholarship by women. One of my hopes was to be able to try to create classroom spaces that decentered whiteness as the unexamined and undisputed frame of reference, and also be able to connect theory to current social issues and movements. In the classroom and on campuses, those lived dimensions of present politics don't go away. They get carried with us. The emotional, physical, and mental effects and impacts of anti-immigration reforms, such as the repeal of DACA and TPS, the Muslim travel bans, the dismantling of reproductive rights, policing and state surveillance, increased US militarization here and abroad. It was really also difficult to teach the day that Dr. Christine Blasey Ford gave her testimony. These attacks on the connected issues of gender equity, justice for poor and working class people, justice for queer and trans people, the movement for Black lives, and immigrant justice, this doesn't just get left behind at the classroom door. Last year, myself, another graduate student, and two of our faculty members co-wrote a paper on the pervasiveness of whiteness and masculinity in the field of communication. It involved a lot of math and numbers in an effort to effectively mobilize proof that confirms common sense understandings of racism in the academy. In the process, one of our reviewers had asked, why should white scholars listen? And in that article we wrote, today's political reality of a Trump presidency and its global parallels are embedded in this longer colonial history of racial power and violence alongside anti-colonial struggles for liberation. That is to say, the present moment that we are in is not exceptional, but rather an extension of a longer history, both national and global, that is built on Native dispossession, Black enslavement, and racialized exclusion and segregation. Centering race as a key analytic frame fundamentally rethinks normative theories and forms of knowledge production by asking what we can learn from those that have for centuries been dispossessed, policed, bombed, and rendered illegal and non-human, and attempts to reorganize social orders that have been universally detrimental. In thinking about my current position in research and scholarship, one of my goals has been to bring my political commitments into spaces of learning through bringing feminist, anti-racist, and anti-imperial practices into writing and teaching. Thinking about who we choose to read and cite, how to hold space in classrooms, how to mutually create processes of collaboration and learning that can engage both the personal and political. Going to college at a historically white university was a moment where I started seeking political community around my position as being Asian American. However, I didn't always have the frameworks to make sense of my own experiences and how that fit into the larger landscape of racial justice. And these frames are always ever evolving. And so, of course, I still don't always have those frames. So there's always ways to keep working on how to be more thoughtful and accountable. A lot of my journey towards racial justice movement work with education as my primary vehicle has been tied to accessing and acquiring the words and language to understand how my own identities and experiences are tied to broader politics of struggle. Words can give meaningful shape to feelings and sensations of something doesn't seem right, why am I so angry, or this is not okay. To know that I wasn't conjuring things out of thin air and to be able to name and identify instances of harm and connect them to very real and pervasive systems of state violence is world-shifting. However, being able to name and discuss something is always just a first step. What does it also mean to begin imagining and then demanding the ways that things could possibly change? As a non-Black and non-Indigenous person of color, part of my personal and political work has been balancing how to ground my politics in the personal, but also moving beyond just my own experiences as the only frame of reference for how oppression works. Being able to shift from here are the ways that I experience systems of oppression towards here are all the many ways I also currently benefit from these systems in order to more actively center the experiences, perspectives, voices, and needs of those most affected by these systems. My current research focuses on how collective Asian American politics aimed towards solidarity can emerge across inequalities and racial differences, and the different roles of digital technologies in shaping racial politics. Something I've been thinking a lot about are the different kinds of alternative formats for presenting arguments that can be accessed by different people. In learning lots of new theories and words, I'm trying to learn new vernaculars for how we talk about racial politics so that justice isn't only defined through the terms of academic language and frameworks. Our current media ecosystem often includes a landscape for political critique can now come in more immediate short forms like memes, GIFs, comics, tweets, etc., that can circulate widely. There's definitely upsides and downsides to these different modes of legibility and forms of translation, such as the considerations of what does it mean to make racialized violence more publicly knowable and thus also consumable. Writing for online feminist publications has been an outlet for me to figure out how to make political and racial critiques more accessible outside of the academy, how to balance the complexity of this work without also using complexity as an excuse for lack of solutions, without reducing critique into buzzwords, and without relying only on clunky and dense language. Writing has been a way for me to make sense of my personal experiences by giving shape to them. One of the first pieces I ever wrote several years ago was about navigating this process of coming out to myself as a survivor of sexual violence and the ways that I felt disconnected from that experience, the internalized myths about violence that we hold, and my fears of invalidation. Writing helped me do something that felt impossible to speak about. While we may not always need someone's story of trauma to mobilize for action, I do also believe that telling stories challenges our own isolation and offers affirmation and validation to other people. From there, the process of writing has become a way for me to articulate connections between my experiences and broader struggles, such as rethinking what Americanness even means as an East Asian American and rejecting the nation state as the only site for liberation. Working from an academic institution, it's important to connect theory to praxis and bring writing and research with the urgency of our political movements by working alongside grassroots and community initiatives. Two additional spaces that I've been thinking through different media formats as extensions of pedagogical practice has been through the New Sanctuary movement in New York and also the Asian American Feminist Collective. I started working with Sanctuary first through a university-wide coalition formed by undergraduate and graduate students, faculty, staff, and alumni across different departments to demand the campus declare itself sanctuary after the implementation of racist anti-immigration policies. We also began to imagine how universities and scholars could participate in movements to build Sanctuary. So a group of us from faculty and graduate students created the Sanctuary syllabus as a tool to both introduce the histories of sanctuary movements and racial structures behind migration and displacement, as well as offer calls to action. The syllabus became realized through a collaborative course called Migration, Refugees, and the Politics of Sanctuary, taught by over 25 faculty and doctorate students last spring that weaved together frameworks such as settler colonialism, climate change, policing, gender violence, and labor exploitation. We also started working with other campuses and also community organizations, including the New Sanctuary Coalition, an interfaith immigrant justice organization in New York that fights against mass deportation and detention. Currently, some of my work has been creating different popular education materials that connect histories of immigration law to present political demands. Speaking on this work on stage and in this platform is also a very different kind of experience for me, because the majority of the work that I do and that is often done is just taking notes at meetings, adding people to an email list, designing and maintaining a website, coordinating schedules, the late night formatting and organizing of resources, editing languages, or playing with grid lines on InDesign. It's often not public facing and not meant to be. And most of this movement work that is behind the scenes is things that we need more of, in addition to the intellectual and emotional labor of thinking, rallying, and speaking. Through the Asian American Feminist Collective, we organize public events and resources in New York City that provide spaces for political education and community building for those in our communities, including East, Southeast, and South Asian, Pacific Islander, multi-ethnic, and diasporic Asian identities. Participating in a collective is a humbling experience in sharing labor, resources, and holding shared space with deep intention. We just put a digital copy of our first zine last week that attempts to identify key foundations and values, and also develop shared languages and definitions for an Asian American feminist movement. The zine itself comes from a collective writing process to draft a movement manifesto, which also revealed how elusive, imprecise, and incomplete producing language can be when it comes to interrogating differential scales of racial and colonial violence. As a format, the zine is limited by the economy of page size, or for the print version we had, the page number is also determined by our willingness to kind of like play with the copy machine. So we wanted to use it as a way to produce our political commitments that address the asymmetrical and uneven histories with state violence. So like trying to figure out how to put that in a creative format, like with limited space. And thinking about how then, like using this framework allows us to act critically through our own positionalities to address both vulnerability and complicity in systems of global racial capitalism, anti-Black racism, and xenophobia, as well as settler colonialism. Both working with Sanctuary and the collective have highlighted for me the importance of collaborative and collective work, especially in an environment that tends to favor and recognize only individual merits and efforts. The work of being with others to think, to feel, and to dream is a form of sustenance that also allows for a politics of indispensability, which is a term I encountered through Kai Chen Tom, and a term that has also existed in various communities. Kai talks about revolutionary politics as a relationship that requires mutual responsibility and processes of rupture and repair. Beyond being productive together, we can and must foster bonds that invest in each other's growth, happiness, and healing. The pleasure of movement work that exists alongside the exhaustion and the anger is also about collectively creating alongside other people to build alternative possibilities, and also being okay with learning new perspectives that push you to dismantle, disrupt, and undo. I'm excited for the teaching ahead and the work that comes after today, and love that this idea of like using political education to occupy spaces and dream up new futures. I think that this is a great space to think about coalitional possibilities and build what Indigenous scholar Leanne Bettis-Mosake-Simpson describes as communities of co-resistors that are willing to work together in solidarity to take on white supremacy, gender violence, heteropatriarchy, and anti-Blackness. Spaces like this offer a special kind of generosity and care and love where we can challenge, inspire, and sustain each other in growth and practice. Thank you so much for having me here today, and I'm looking forward to talking with you all more throughout the day. And join me in welcoming the students to the stage. I thought we'd just get started by having all the students introduce their organizations and maybe talk about some of the ongoing projects and initiatives that you have for the coming year.
I'm so sorry. I'm getting over something. My name is Leah Kim. I'm Vice President, Interim President of Asia. And the big goal that I really have for this organization is going forward, acknowledging the diversity that is within the continent, and acknowledging that it's not just East Asia, it's South Asia, Southeast Asia, Western Asia. It's just such a big continent. We can't just focus on one part.
My name is Sarah Prezada. I'm president of DAISY, which is the South Asian Student Association. And I think my biggest goal is to like Leah said, create awareness and just create the representation on campus. I think it's really important, especially to highlight the different areas of Asia, like she said, but to also create that safe haven just specifically for us. But yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris Henderson West. I am the president of EAGLE, Emerson's Advancement Group for Love and Expression. One of our projects, or what we really want to focus on this year, is inclusion and making sure we focus on intersectionality as a way to help create more awareness of queerness on campus.
Hello, my name is Isel. I am head of stage at Flawless Brown. Flawless Brown is a woman of color artist collective here on campus. We have different facets like stage, rights, pictures, which focuses on film, and comedy, as well as marketing. And basically our focus is to create a space where women of color can create the art that they want to create.
Thank you all. One of the things that struck me about the ways that you're talking about your work and the kind of collectives and like creating different spaces that thinks about like diversity within the continent of Asia, like thinking about inclusion and intersectionality in your groups. I'd love to kind of hear more of like the different ways and practices that you do that and enact those kind of spaces in your organizations.
Well, I could start with an upcoming event. So with that intersectionality, I want to do a lot of collaborations with other orgs and acknowledge that one person can have so many different identities, and sometimes it's hard to navigate that. And sometimes having people from both identities, for example, come together and talk about what it's like to be each and then talk about what it's like to be both is a really important space to create on campus. Just like how Eagle and Eagle and Asia are going to make an event upcoming to talk about what it's like to be queer and Asian. Yeah.
Definitely on that road to talking about like intersectionality, Dissent does have an event coming up called Chit Chat Chai, which is basically we just sit around, just drink tea, and we just talk about the taboo topics that are not brought up in our own culture and that are not brought up in our own space. And then we use that as sort of like an outlet to really talk about it and to really express our feelings towards it and to kind of not only express the fact that we do have a bridge, you know, Western and Eastern bridge, but how we can deal with that in our own space and know that we support each other in terms of it.
Well, for EAGLE, it's Queer History Month. And so for the month, we decided we are doing what we call an EAGLE takeover with different cultural orgs. To help focus on intersectionality. So we partner with Asia, we partnered with Emerson International, Ebony, and a couple other ones as well. But mainly, we also just realized that there are so many ways that the queer identity can affect how you live. And so we want to just make sure that we give those spaces to all those people and give them that opportunity to discuss in their own space.
Yeah, so Flawless was built off the intersectionality of being a woman and being a person of color. And what's really great about our organization is that woman of color could mean anyone from any background. So I know there are a lot of Asians as well as Black people, Latinx people in our organization, and basically it's open to any femme that self-identifies as a person of color. And I think that brings intersectionality into our org automatically because there's already so many different experiences and different ways that people interpret like the world and how they see the world. And then with all those experiences, we're actually able to create art, which is really cool.
Maybe I'll also share more then like about the ways like in coming up with some of these events and holding these spaces within your groups, like the ways that like you and the members in your group hold each other accountable, right, to kind of have these internal discussions of like what does it mean to like have all of these different ways to experience queerness, to like think about the kind of like collaborative events that you're doing, et cetera, but like what that internal process of accountability looks like to grow your groups.
Okay, I can start. that at least with the Eagle e-board, we just have a really good group of people who really are aimed at making sure we touch everybody. So, I mean, we started off the year talking about our own personal goals, and then we talk about our goals for the organization. We talk about every meeting ways to make sure we can make our members feel more comfortable. We ask for their ideas. We ask what they want to do. We make sure that we try our hardest to make sure. Okay, I just lost my train of thought. We just try to make sure that we continue to keep each other accountable by making sure, like, even on the smallest thing, on the smallest level of like dietary restrictions, if we have catering, making sure that there's food there that everybody can eat, making sure that we're addressing people by correct pronouns and making sure they feel comfortable in doing that. Making sure that everybody's stories feel heard, because I think we just feel that it's just very, very important, which I think is another reason why we partner with so many people throughout Queer History Month. Yeah.
I think creating a safe space is the first step in holding people accountable, because if people feel safe in the space that they're in, then if you call someone in, they won't get like offended or hurt, you know? They'll like take that as okay, she is calling me in because what I said, like I should look within myself and see what it is that I said that could be offensive, or like if I don't know, then ask the questions and not like stay in ignorance. But I think the first step is really creating that safe space, because without that safe space, even if you call me in a very like polite way, I might feel attacked and called out.
Some ways that Asia tends to try to keep each other accountable, like the e-board and such, we just try to take care of each other first, because you know, the camaraderie within e-board and within everyone who wants to help out with the org, we need to take care of ourselves in order to help the org first, right? So we always make sure when we have our like meetings, we get lunch together, make sure that we're doing okay. We do check-ins before meetings and make sure the members are doing okay. And we're always open to suggestions on what kind of resources and what kind of spaces that our members specifically need. If they need a meeting on a different day because they just can't show up because of classes or other commitments, and we just try to stay open to that.
I think Dissent, what they do in terms of taking, or what we do in terms of taking accountability, is to make sure that we stay like a close-knit family. I think that kind of like that family-oriented like characteristic about South Asian people, kind of, I want to bring that and have people resonate with that on campus. It's kind of like a funny way of just relating to everybody. Like I could just see, like I could spot out like a South Asian on campus and be like, wow, you're South Asian, you're brown, you're a part of this family already, like come. And so we just make sure to like not only recruit members that want that safe space, it's just to make sure that they know they have family here. You know, I think that's like a different border than just saying you're my friend or like you're my partner in crime through this. It's kind of like you're just family, like you remind me of back home. And I definitely try to instill that into Dissent.
I love the use of like family to describe your organization as well. And something that like what I'm thinking about with like all of your answers, right, are these like these various ways that you're creating spaces, right? Like from even just the dietary restrictions to thinking about how the space can just accommodate someone's presence. And maybe now like connecting that to like the kind of larger demands that you have at the university level, right? And that like often it's harder for an entire institution to kind of like accommodate, but yet like what are the ways, right, like that you're imagining or reimagining the ways that the university structure could accommodate different people in all the ways that they need to be included.
Okay. I'll start. So like I know Eagle is working with Emerson Intercultural and other departments on campus working on the bathroom initiative to make sure that we have gender-neutral restrooms in the most important locations. I think on top of that, there's also just a lot of work. We hired a position for LGBTQIA plus identifying student affairs. And there's just been a lot of progress around making sure that that people feel included and feel comfortable on campus. So there's been a lot of progress, I think, on our aspect.
I think something that the institutions can work on that can be like more effective immediately is hiring more professors of color, and not necessarily like to teach African American history, but to teach like I know as an acting student, there's only one professor of color on the whole acting staff, and as an acting student, like it's like I get the same education as everyone else, but it would be different if I was taught by more professors of color, could talk more about the industry as a person of color, what they had to go through, how they get to where they were, because a reality is that being a person of color, that will affect the path that you go down. So I know that's something that would affect. Thanks. So I think the institution that could, I think that is like the most effective way. And it also like promotes like role models. Like I don't want to put that burden on professors of colors, but like just being able to see a person of color in a position of like success. You know, not many people of color don't have that where they come from. So I think that's very important.
I guess like also maybe I'll open it like for you all to also ask each other questions and ask me, because I know there's like different ways that you're trying to think through about like these action steps that people can take towards activism, but maybe open up the space so there's more questions posed by you all.
Yeah, so my biggest question would be how I like taking on an institution like something that's institutional. It can be very daunting. It can feel like you're helpless. Like I know many times I would just like be like, I don't know what me as a single person can do. I want to talk about how students can work together, like all students, all Emerson students can work together to create institutional change. And like, what does that look like? I know that's a really big question.
So I, on campus, wear many different hats with many other organizations that I'm a part of. And so I always believe that, well, this is the political communications major in me, that there's a potential for government to work. So like utilizing things such as SGA to help get changes. Like I know somebody the other day on a very random note was like, y'all got our microwaves back in center stage, thank you. And so it's just something that small, but even like in, doing like financial aid or scholarships or things like that, there's things that avenue can do. And then along with just uniting together as a student population in whatever form that is, there's so much change that can come out of that with like working with power and our student protests that we've done in the past and the different initiatives that we've taken to help create change on campus. So I mean, I think it's just a matter of finding the right avenue, because really change can happen in any way and in any form, and it's really, I guess, how you kind of define it as well.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, the easiest and simplest way to really support that change is to show up, right? For our members to come and support us and to tell us how we can help them back and how we can make this school and push the school to be more accommodating for us. Because even within one org, there's so much diversity. in identity and within whatever the org is supposed to stand for, you know, we need to have that feedback from the members and from the students at Emerson College. So I think that's just a really important and often overlooked way of supporting the changes that happen and should happen.
Yeah. Other questions that you have for each other?
Okay, so I guess there's many organizations on campus, and we all serve a different purpose, whether that's journalism, film, cultural identification, whatever. What is, and I know we kind of sometimes talk about this, what is one way that I guess we can all, what is one thing that we can do together to help unify us?
Like as a student body, or as like Emerson College as an institution unify?
Both. I would just say just as like a student body.
Okay. I have to think about it now. Well, I think conversations like this are very important, so thank you for everyone who showed up today. I think that shows that you care and that you're interested in hearing about this conversation. And I think like extending the invitation to your friends, like notice who's not here, not in like a bad way, but like call in, say, hey, I think this is very important for all of us to hear. Yeah, like bringing people in to like, because we do hold these spaces for this reason. And this is like a great opportunity for people on our campus as a student body to unite around this one thing.
I think communication is really important. I feel like it's necessary to like be an org and to sort of just reach out to other orgs because there is like a pattern that we see where orgs go like dormant a little bit, and they kind of stop having events, they stop having meetings, or they just become totally inactive. Like I know that Habibi's became inactive, Daisy did, which is why I had to bring it up again because I knew I wanted that space for us. So I think that just reaching out and knowing people in that group and saying, hey, like why isn't this happening anymore? What's happening with this? Do you need help with this? Like we want to make sure that our org is just as, I guess, brought up as yours in a sense, and kind of just making sure that we all have an equal amount of presence on campus. So I think that reaching out is like a big thing. I feel like I want, if anything, my Ebo to do that and to collaborate more and be like, hey, Leah, do you need help with this and that? Do you need any help with this event? Should we cater to you in some way towards that? Or like Flawless Brown, like we can collaborate in some sense. Or just reaching out, communication, I think, can never go wrong, in my opinion.
I think it's just important to note that we don't exist in a vacuum with our own orgs, and we're all part of the cultural organizations on campus, right? And we're all supposed to be fighting for that one, like that diversity, that representation, you know, having our voices out there, having a space for us. So I think just having that in mind, that we're not just in a vacuum and that we all exist together, interdependent, and I think that's a really good way to support the camaraderie between us.
So maybe now we can just open it up to questions from the audience.
Hopefully it's, oh, yeah, we're going. So if you have any questions for Rachel or the panelists, please approach one of the microphones.
Hello, I'm Ken File. I teach in VMA. And first of all, I just want to say how articulate and brave y'all are, and how great it is you're talking about such important issues and subjects. I guess I always have this question. I've had it for 30 or 40 years, so apologies if I've asked you that question before, or folks here. I'm curious, in the discussion of intersectionality and inclusiveness, there is this kind of, juggling of individual identities and, of course, multiple identities. And I'm just wondering how you negotiate that in your groups and, if you, I guess maybe interpersonally as well. And I suppose when those kind of interpersonal moments which occur in the groups, when you kind of have to think politically, I'm thinking of, the fellow's name escapes me, he just came out with a memoir, one of the leaders of Black Lives Matter, who talks, he's gay, and he talks about being in the quiet and negotiating his sexual orientation in relation to his ethnicity. Yeah, thanks.
I can. Go. Okay. Well, thank you for your question. I think one way to negotiate that, to acknowledge that everyone has so much intersectionality within their identities, is just to personally just not assume anything about someone. Because when, for example, in Asia, I'm not going to assume that somebody is Chinese just because they look East Asian, right? And I'm not going to assume someone is something. I'm not going to assume people's pronouns. I'm not going to assume their sexual orientation. It's just things like that, and you let them come out with their identities when they feel the need to, or when they feel like they want to, or are comfortable with it. And part of it is fostering a space so that they are comfortable with coming out with, oh, I'm actually Korean, or I am this way or that way. And it's just making sure that they feel comfortable with verbalizing it, because that's half the battle of negotiating it within yourself too.
I think one thing that I learned, and I think this also helps the question, one of the things that I learned when we were planning Queer History Month and looking at all the orgs that we wanted to work with is that there are so many ways that identities intersect, just more than just like you think. There are so many ways to have discussions and topics and themes and look at the different nuances of what makes you you. I think even like in our collaboration with Asia, I said it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I was like, Leah, think about this idea. What if we do this? And just because there's just so, I don't know. I just find it fascinating. People have so many layers to themselves. And I think it's always good to explore and find yourself within each of those layers, and to learn how to own it, per se, or learn how to embrace it, rather. And I think that helps in being able to help juggle those different intersections. And I think it becomes less juggle work and more just tossing and catching.
Wow, this is really tall. Hi, beautiful people. So I'm Jamaica. You all know me, because you're mine. For those that don't know me, I am the new position that was hired for intercultural student services for LGBTQIA+. Ooh, starting to get nervous, a lot of people. My question though for you is, since I do believe in stories and the weight and the power that they hold, is there a story that you feel comfortable sharing that regards any of your identities and how it's had you navigate specifically here in Emerson and academia, and kind of what that's meant to you? Whether it's experiencing any sort of microaggressions, or what kind of weight has that put on you in the ways that you identify? Does that make sense? Take a minute to think about it.
One thing I could,
looking.
Well, thank you, Jamaica. I think one thing is I came into school thinking that I didn't care about diversity. I cared about the program. And then I got here and was just kind of shaken. I didn't expect, the school. And I remember walking in to one of my classes where I was the only person of color, like the only person of color. And I sat in the front, so I didn't have to look in front of me for rows of people who weren't people of color. And it's just little things like that. I guess it helped me focus more in the class because I was in the front, but but it was just, now I find myself doing that in every class, regardless of whether or not I'm the only person of color. Just staying in the front so that I don't have to, face how othered I am just by existing in that space. So that's definitely something I wanted to throw out there.
Culture shock is such a real thing, y'all. So I'm from Boston. So like I came to Emerson, I was like, got this in the bag, I know all the spots to eat. I got nothing, and no, it's very different. I went to a Boston public school, so the minorities were the majority. And I went to an art school, so like my theater ensemble was like all people of color. And then I come here to Emerson, and like my teacher who in high school, like she warned me. She was like, I went to school here, I know what it's like, the culture shock is real. I was like, I got this. But it's very different to be in a space and trying to create art, but no one in the space, they don't understand like your background. Even if you try to explain it to them, even if you try, even when you try to do all those things to try to put yourself on the same field, it just never adds up. So then you try to like eliminate that part of you, to like get the best education and like try to get the most out of like your time here. But it's unfair that I have to like wash myself out to get my education. So yeah, I don't do that no more, so.
I'm originally from New York, so I think that everyone regards New York as like this big melting pot full of diversity. And like Leah said, I never thought I would value diversity like I do until I didn't have it anymore. I remember when I first came to Emerson, I walked into class and all I had to do was be like, we're not the same, gotcha. So I sat down. But the thing that really changed my mind, and something that was positive that I want to highlight, is the effort that professors put in to pronounce names correctly. I never had that in high school. If anything, I had diversity around me. I had different people that didn't look like me, but the effort wasn't there to pronounce their name correctly or to just acknowledge the fact that, yes, we're different and we should highlight it because it's beautiful that we're different, but also the fact that we should put in the same effort as to someone that's a majority and not a minority. So when I first came to Emerson, I remember I had like 3 of my professors on one day be like, is this how your name is supposed to be pronounced? Is it supposed to be pronounced like this? And I was shocked at the effort. And I was like, wow, this is something I could get used to. So that's something that was positive I wanted to highlight. Out of everything that we can go through here at Emerson, I feel like looking at the positives and the silver linings is more important than anything when maintaining positivity as a person of color here.
Brenda, maybe we can just take the next 2 questions at once after you share.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought it was.
The spotlight on you. We can also take the other 2 questions.
No, it's fine. Okay, so I think the first time, well, not the first time, but I think the real time that I realized that I was different on Emerson College was the night I was writing what I was going to say at the protest that we were doing last year that I spoke at. And I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's like kind of poor, and well, it's not kind of, it's very poor. It's terribly racist and terribly homophobic. But I went to art schools growing up, middle through high school. So I really grew up around queer people of color. So it was never a thing that I necessarily thought about. Like, I have a distinct memory of like somebody just voguing down the middle of a hallway during changing of schedules. And I was like, all right. But that was just like the thing, that was the community, and I never gave that a thought. And then I get here and people are like, Vogue? Is that Madonna? And I'm like, no. And so I just remember that night before, and I was just thinking of like all these different ways that I realized that I've changed and the environments around me have changed, and how the identity of being Black, bisexual, poor, and at a predominantly white institution all kind of interact, and how that shapes my experience, and how that shaped who I was for the first year and a half of my time here at Emerson. And after I was able to get what I felt out, it was a lot more freeing, and it was a lot more back. I was back, and I guess like my high school self. So that was my time.
Great. So maybe for time, we'll do like all the questions like people have, and then we can answer all of those maybe collectively. Does that sound good?
Hi, my name is Katiana Hopeful, and I'm a freshman journalism student. And I have heard you all talking about how you're finding ways to support your communities here at Emerson, but I was wondering if there are ways that you're getting active in supporting your communities outside of Emerson. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Madison Goldberg. I'm a freshman journalism student, and I was wondering what the significance is for students to start these movements and orgs, even at like a small scale, just amongst themselves, like without the help of administration. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Danny Jean-Baptiste, a theater and performance sophomore, and so this school, like y'all mentioned, is predominantly white, and I've been in classes as the only person of color, and a lot of the white students have been asking me how they can help support these organizations. So I was wondering if you could speak on that. Thank you.
Well, when it comes to support, come to our shows. Yes, very important. I think, at least when it comes to Flawless Brown, all of the art that we create is socially conscious art. So it is about being a woman of color in this space, in this country currently. So if you come support our art, see us in our elements, you might actually also learn something while you're there. So that's for supporting. That's my biggest recommendation. Really supporting, showing up is really important.
Yeah, I would say just also on the note of support, I would say just going to different cultural organization meetings, because I know ours are like always open to the majority of the public. And I mean, I think that was also kind of the reason behind our name change as well, is that we wanted to help guide. Well, okay, so we also want to focus on equity, action, guidance, leadership, and education. So we wanted to help, so we wanted to help, we want to help educate people, and we want to help tell them the different things that they can do. Like, we are supposed to be doing a phone bank with the yes on 3 question later on. So that's for that second question in there. Like, we have many things going on, so like get involved with the cultural orgs on Facebook or coming to meetings.
On one of the previous questions about how we get involved outside of campus, I know that Asia is trying to promote a lot of the film festivals, like Boston's Asian Film Festival, and getting the word out there about that and letting people know that it's not just this school. We can go out and still find our spaces, especially with Chinatown right around the corner. It's like amazing. We get catering there all the time. And it's just knowing that there's other schools that have the same organizations, like Asian student organizations and such like that, keeping in contact with them and making our bubble even bigger, like making our space even bigger and reaching to all the corners of the city.
I remember there was a special circumstance that I went through when I had about 4 of my Caucasian friends ask me permission to come to my org, which I think that I feel like there is a lot of hesitance from a lot of people to come to like cultural orgs and say, okay, I'm not a part of this culture, am I allowed to still come? And I can't speak on behalf of all the orgs, but I can just say for myself that anyone's welcome to come. You get what I'm saying? Like, I feel like just having that ego to learn is something that is invaluable. You know, just that I feel you can show your support by just wanting to learn more about that culture, you know? Appreciating it instead of just learning about it from somewhere and kind of like taking it as your own, you know? Or just anything behind that, I think that's so important. And in terms of showcasing that outside of school, I know that Daisy wants to collaborate with like Northeastern's South Asian sorority. I never knew there was South Asian sorority here in Boston. And so they have like a Bollywood team. And so I was like, okay, wow, we can like collaborate and we can host like an event on campus where people from Emerson can learn certain like Bollywood dance moves, or like there's a different like dance team at Northeastern where they have like a Bhangra team, which is like another different type of dance. And I think collaborating outside of school and like that kind of, that collaboration is so important because not only are you creating that space in your own college, doing it for basically the whole town and doing it for basically the whole area that you reside in is so important too, because it just broadens that inclusivity and it broadens that awareness, which I think is important.
Are you going to say something? Okay. Just to answer the other question about creating these organizations outside of administrative personnel, people, I feel like most of our orgs were created not technically like with the school's permission, basically created out of necessity for a space. And I feel like if there is a space that hasn't been created yet, but there's a need for that space, then go ahead and create it, because everyone deserves a space where they feel safe. Yeah.
I guess, are we at time? Yeah. With that? Okay. So can we all just join in a round of applause for the students on the stage? And all the amazing work they do here and in the community.
And please, another round of applause for Rachel Quell. Thank you so much. Just a reminder that the next 2 panels that will be taking place at 11:15 will be A Primer for Activists at the Semel Theater and Who's America at the Green Theater. And please attend those important conversations. But let's have another round of applause for our entire panel and Rachel Quell. Very inspiring. Thank you.